Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
the risk is very real and immediate.
Illinois will be an oasis for those seeking abortions, but some policymakers say the state must hurry to shore up protections and options.
Plus, a legal look at what overturning Roe may mean for future cases heard by the Supreme Court.
Victory for white life in the Supreme Court yesterday.
Our Spotlight Politics team on the latest from the campaign trail.
I can't even imagine myself without it. You know, when something so toxic becomes such a part of you.
A crisis in youth mental health, looking at the issue and previewing the new PBS film, Hiding in Plain Sight.
Plans to revive LaSalle Street, that and more business news from Cranes.
And masks and identities are at the heart of an art show curated by Chicago rapper Vic Mensa. But first, some of today's top stories. Mayor Lori Lightfoot is facing some criticism for making an obscene comment referring to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Lightfoot was addressing the crowd at Chicago's Pride Parade on Saturday, one day after the court voted 6-3 to overturn federal abortion protections.
Now we know what happened with the Supreme Court yesterday. And if you read Clarence Thomas' concurrence, he said, "Thank you, Clarence Thomas."
Probably guessed the bit we took out included the F word. Several of Lightfoot's mayoral opponents criticized her comments. Former CPS chief Paul Vallis told the Sun-Times her remarks were, quote, dangerous and totally inappropriate. Friday's landmark ruling overturned nearly 50 years of precedent to strip women of the federal right to an abortion guaranteed by the court case Roe v. Wade. In the wake of that decision, Justice Thomas indicated that same-sex marriage and contraception rights could also be reconsidered by the court. We'll have more on all of this in a few moments. A 5-month-old girl was fatally shot while she rode inside a vehicle in South Shore on Friday evening. Cecilia Thomas was among 6 people killed in shootings over the weekend in Chicago. Police Superintendent David Brown addressed Thomas's shooting at a news conference this afternoon.
This is an unthinkable tragedy, and we want to take just a moment to offer our deepest condolences on behalf of the Chicago Police Department to the family. Our officers and detectives are working to bring the offenders involved to justice. This is unacceptable, and we won't stand for it.
Police say Thomas was riding in a vehicle in the 7700 block of South Shore Drive at around 6 p.m. Friday when someone from inside another vehicle began firing shots. Brown said that no one is in custody at this time in relation to the killing. And more Supreme Court news today as the justices rule in favor of a public high school football coach who said his constitutional right to freedom of speech and religion were violated. Joseph Kennedy, a former assistant football coach in Western Washington, was fired for his practice of praying on the 50-yard line at the end of games. In a 6-3 ruling along ideological lines, Justice Neil Gorsuch, writing for the majority, noted that the Constitution called for respect and tolerance of religious and non-religious views alike. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, writing for the minority, noted the court's ruling gave, quote, short shrift to the Constitution's prohibition against government endorsing religion. Up next, more on the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
While abortions are now illegal in many other states, including some of those neighboring Illinois, abortion remains legal here. And in the wake of Friday's Supreme Court decision, advocates on both sides of the abortion issue are gearing up for action. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda, so what is on the agenda for both sides?
Well, Paris, as you noted, abortion is legal in Illinois, and that is thanks to a pair of laws passed in the past 5 years. But also, as you noted, advocates say that that is not enough. Here is the head of Planned Parenthood of Illinois.
We call on our leaders in Springfield to take the necessary next steps for true, equitable access to abortion care. We must increase funding, cut red tape for abortion providers, and push forward all possible progress for abortion care in Illinois. We need more progress and more protections for providers who will be caring for this dramatic increase in patients in Illinois in our new post-Roe reality.
An estimated 20 to 30,000 people coming in from out of state. Now, no date has yet been set, but the governor, J.B. Pritzker, has said he'll call a special session for sometime in July to begin to take up some of the things that you just heard about there. Now, precisely what will be on that agenda is still being worked out, but one item that is geared for passage would be to grant licensing rights to medical professionals from other states so they could help with abortion services in Illinois. State Representative Kelly Cassidy says Illinois learned lessons about how to do that as it sought to bring in more doctors and nurses at the height of the COVID pandemic. But she says Illinois also has to deal with the opposite and provide protections to Illinois healthcare professionals who are then, again, healthcare professionals licensed here in other states.
A lot of those folks who live in our border communities are jointly licensed in those border states so that they can provide aftercare to their patients when they go back, that kind of thing. But, you know, in the normal times, if somebody lost their medical license in Missouri and they had a medical license in Illinois, we'd automatically be like, okay, you got a problem here in Illinois. But that bill establishes that an adverse action in another state based on an action that is not illegal in our state will not impact your license here in Illinois.
Now, that goes both ways. Anti-abortion rights attorney and former state lawmaker Peter Green, that is, says that states that ban abortion will be looking to protect the unborn from being brought to Illinois to be aborted.
But it is for legislators in those states whom we consult with, it's an issue of life and death for them over folks they consider to be residents of their states. This is the thing. Now that Roe v. Wade has been overthrown, unborn children residing in the state of Missouri, you know, the state of Missouri has an interest to protect those unborn children.
Planned Parenthood of Illinois' director says the organization is researching the issue of other states trying to hold those in Illinois responsible for things that are legal in this state. She says that there is no evidence that criminalizing people for what legally happens in Illinois should be a concern, pointing out, for example, that marijuana, legal in Illinois, but not being criminally prosecuted by other states. Mayor Lori Lightfoot, herself a lawyer, also weighed in.
Someone who leaves the state to get health care because they can't get it in their home state, and they're going to criminalize them, and we're going to incentivize bounties for them. I mean, think about the absurdity of that. This is America. This is America in 2022. This is not America in 1822, right? When I hear that, that harbors back to a horrible, dark, original sin in our country of slavery and people leaving states where they were enslaved to find freedom.
Representative Cassidy says Illinois is taking this issue seriously, however, pointing out that the U.S. Constitution's full faith and credit clause requires states to respect the laws of other states.
If you're ignoring judgments from other states here, well, other states get to ignore judgments that sort of fall into the category of, like, my kid's adoption is a judgment in the state of Illinois. Does another state, are we giving another state license to ignore that adoption? So we want to tread carefully, but we want to tread thoughtfully.
So in new ground for more legal action, perhaps on that front. Meanwhile, a priority for the anti-abortion movement is reinstating an Illinois law that up until recently had required minors' parents be notified before they could have an abortion.
One of our primary goals is ensuring that the people of Illinois know how out of step our abortion laws are, how completely radical they are.
To now fight out the abortion issue. It is not a foregone conclusion, really, in nearly any state. Now even Illinois, if it wants to regulate in a different way in accord with the wishes of its people who have said they want to, for instance, they want to ban abortion after the first trimester here in Illinois. That can now be considered by the Illinois General Assembly.
The primary, as we'll be talking about, is on Tuesday, and all of the Republican candidates running for governor are anti-abortion, really prioritizing repealing that, bringing back, that is, the parental notification law. Also, you have 2 state Supreme Court seats up for grabs. So those in the choice movement say to take this matter seriously. As of now, however, that wish list that you heard from Breen and from Right to Life's Gerke, well, there is not support for that in the General Assembly. With that, back to you, Paris.
All right, Amanda, thanks, and we'll see you again later in the show for Spotlight Politics. And now to Brandis and some legal insights into the impact of the court's ruling on abortion and beyond. Brandis.
In Paris, as we've been discussing, the overturning of Roe versus Wade by the Supreme Court has massive repercussions, both on abortion services and perhaps other issues to be decided by the court moving forward. This, as Justice Clarence Thomas wrote in his opinion that the court should reconsider rulings that decided issues like the right to obtain contraception and same-sex marriage. Joining us to discuss this are Rita Gitchell, special counsel for the Thomas More Society, a Chicago-based conservative public interest law firm. Gitchell is a former president of the National Lawyers Association. Carolyn Shapiro, professor of law and founder and co-director of the Institute on the Supreme Court of the United States at Chicago-Kent College of Law. Shapiro served as a law clerk for Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer. And David Franklin, associate professor of law at DePaul University, who served as a law clerk for Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Thanks to all three of you for joining us. First, I want to get your reaction to the Dobbs ruling from the Supreme Court. Carolyn Shapiro, let's start with you, please.
Well, I wasn't surprised by the ruling. Obviously, we saw the leak about a month and a half ago, and I frankly wasn't surprised by the content of the draft at that time. I am a little surprised that the court didn't address some of the criticisms that were leveled against the aspects of the draft itself. For example, the draft opinion addresses the equal protection arguments in favor of giving women control over their bodies in exactly one paragraph. That was something that many people pointed out was really an insufficient way to address some really quite significant arguments about equality. So I also think that the court has absolutely underestimated the amount of litigation and disruption that this opinion is going to generate. The court suggested that they thought they might be washing their hands of the issue now that they have, in their view, returned it to the democratic process. But there are a host of legal issues and challenges that are going to arise are astonishing, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along.
Rita Gitchell, your thoughts?
We think that this opinion was a long time coming. Roe was egregiously wrong when it was decided. It was a work of a legislative scheme that didn't exist in any state. And by reversing it, the integrity of the court has been restored. So we're very happy for this decision. And I think, people thought it would just go away, but those sidewalk counselors, those that marched for life for these last 50 years in the forefront, everyone is very, very happy that this decision came down. But yes, there's work ahead of us because each state is going to be having discussions, and I hope that we can have civil discussions and good discussions about what should happen going forward.
David Franklin, your reaction to the ruling?
Well, I think it's terribly wrong. There are lots of things that I think are terribly wrong about it. But the two that jump out to me is, first, the court basically gives short shrift to the idea that this was a right that was announced almost 50 years ago, and that generations of women have come to rely on it in shaping their lives, their choices about when and whether to have sex, when and whether to marry, to enter the labor force, and so on. And the justices just sort of give the back of the hand to all of those concerns. And the second thing that I think is terribly wrong about it is its methodology. The justices view this very difficult question solely through the lens of history and tradition, with no interest balancing, no line drawing, no respect for precedent. This isn't originalism, it's a parody of originalism. I don't think any sensible society, if it had the choice, would choose to give over these questions to 5 or 9 or 6 lawyers in robes pretending to be historians. That's not the choice our founding fathers made, and it's not a sensible choice for us to make either.
David,
can I just add that the originalism of the Dobbs opinion, the abortion opinion, is of a piece with the originalism, or I put in quotes, originalism of the Bruin opinion, which is the opinion that struck down a longstanding New York law restricting people's right to carry a gun. In both cases, the court dismisses, out of sort of waves away, history that doesn't support the particular result that the court is attempting to reach, and actually in completely opposite ways in the two cases. In Dobbs, where there was no regulation of abortion in the past, the court says, well, that doesn't mean that the states understood that to be that there was a right. And on the other hand, where there was no regulation of firearms or particular types of regulation, the court says there cannot be.
Sorry, I just want to jump in because I want to talk about sort of moving forward as well. David, could states ban residents from traveling to a state where there is access, like Illinois, for example? Could states ban their residents from traveling to do that? Is that unconstitutional?
I think that's an open question. You know, Justice Brett Kavanaugh wrote separately in the Dobbs opinion to say pretty forcefully that in his view, states could not do that because there is a longstanding right of interstate travel. I would just note two things about that. First, the right of interstate travel has no more textual basis than the right to an abortion. So if the majority is serious that rights that lack textual basis face an uphill battle in terms of being recognized, then perhaps Kavanaugh's confidence on this issue is unwarranted. And the other thing I would say about that is, you know, I'm not sure we can trust the promises that are made by the conservative majority on the court or members of that majority. You certainly see Justice Thomas in his own separate concurrence practically inviting litigants to come to the court and ask the court to overrule decades and decades of fundamental rights decisions. And for all I know, those could include decisions that grant a right of interstate travel. So I don't expect the court to give its approval to laws that try to restrict interstate movement, but I wouldn't bet my house on it.
And Rita, what about that? You know, that same concept that states could potentially prohibit their own residents from traveling out of state to get an abortion. And to David's point about concerns that other rights that have been previously granted by the Supreme Court could be reconsidered. Other 14th Amendment decided cases like contraception or same-sex relationships. What do you see going forward?
The court was very careful in its opinion to say that the decision was limited to the subject of abortion. And why is that? The Mississippi legislature described what was at issue as unborn human life. If you recall, back with Roe, they didn't know when life begins. Well, today it's filmed, it's photographed, it's documented, you could see it. We know what human life is, and the doctors in Mississippi didn't want to, after 15 weeks of development, perform abortion. They considered the methods barbaric. And different countries, the United States is out of step. Most countries, you know, don't have abortions going on after 15 weeks. There are 7 countries that do. You know, but the United States doesn't have the same or has a different respect for human life. Those other decisions don't involve the termination of human life.
Brandes, can I just respond to that briefly? David. First of all, I think the idea that a photograph or a sonogram can resolve the sort of metaphysical or religious question of when life begins is a bit far-fetched. But more importantly, for purposes of our discussion today, the court was very careful to say that the reason it was not recognizing an abortion right, the reason it was overruling Roe, was not because the issue involved unborn life, but rather because in the court's view, the 14th Amendment simply does not reach this issue of a woman's ability to control what happens with her body. On that score, I see no principled distinction, unfortunately, between this case and ones that involve same-sex marriage or intimacy or contraception or a host of other unenumerated rights.
I respectfully disagree, David. They were very careful in their opinion to quote that Roe involved, quote, potential life, quote, fetal life. And your point on the photographs, I mean, the man who created the first test tube baby found differences by the 4-cell stage of the inner cell mass, the placenta and the cord, the germline for the next generation. I mean, we have documentation scientifically that shows when human life begins.
Rita, I just want to jump in here. And Carolyn, we've got, just a few seconds left, but, Roe has been the law for 50 years. Does this precedent what precedent does overturning this historical ruling, what could it indicate for future cases that are decided by the court in 25 to 30 seconds?
I agree with David. I think all kinds of things are on the table based on this. Rights to contraception. We already see legislators in some states seeking to outlaw certain types of contraception because they believe that they somehow are equivalent to abortion, or they think there could be. We're going to see we could see new attacks on same-sex marriage, on same-sex intimacy. I think it opens a Pandora's box, and the distinction where the court says those other things don't involve fetal life, which is true, but the logic of why they don't recognize the right to a woman's right to control her body is quite exactly what David said. Okay. It has to do with what's in the Constitution and what they think it means.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. I want to thank the three of you for joining us, Carolyn Shapiro, David Franklin, and Rita Gitchell.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Up next, what's behind the mental health crisis for young people? But first, a look at the weather.
All month long, we've been focusing on the crisis of youth mental illness. 1 in 3 high school students say they've experienced persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention say that's a 40% increase from 2009. Tonight, WTTW premieres the 2-part film Hiding in Plain Sight, which explores some of the mental health challenges today's youth face. Take a listen.
I think there's so many things you can say about mental illness. It comes out of nowhere, and then it just creeps into your body, and you've got something inside you, and you don't know how to deal with it.
Joining us to talk about the film and the crisis in mental illness among young people are Tara Gill, clinical psychologist at Lurie Children's Hospital's Center for Childhood Resilience, and Eric Ewers, co-director and editor of the film Hiding in Plain Sight. Welcome both of you to Chicago tonight. Eric, you and your brother made this film. You're tasked with digging into this massive subject, and you told the story through not only mental health providers, but 20 young people that have struggled with mental illness. What did you learn from them?
We learned so much from them. Their willingness to open their hearts and their minds, their thoughts and their feelings to us. They're heroes. The courage they have is beyond description. And Chris and I really learned that through listening to their experiences, we found ourselves in there, which really says that, mental illness and mental health challenges can affect just about everyone to some degree. And when you have that ability to look into and experience someone else's experiences, it gives you an opportunity to take a look at yourself. And it's a profound thing for both of us. We've been able to finally address our own mental health challenges after, for me, 53 years.
And something I presume the viewers might do as well once they watch this. A lot of things that are relatable here. Tara Gill, these kids, as Eric said, are very candid in this film about the struggles they go through. But how big a stigma is there still today for youth to come forward about these challenges?
Right. So the stigmas about mental health, having a mental health diagnosis or seeking treatment, have begun to improve. However, it's still very courageous to come out in front of peers or at a national stage and indicate that you struggle with any type of pathology or differences as an adolescent. You just desperately want to fit in and not to stand out. And these youth are standing out based on their bravery and their transparency about how to cope with mental illness.
Eric Ewers, was it tough to give them sort of a safe place for them to express these very candid thoughts and emotions, or did they just kind of naturally do it?
Well, it's always a process. I think most interviewees were somewhat reticent at first. For example, McLean's parents, McLean's only 11 years old, and his parents said, no, we don't want this out there. But it was the desire of McLean to want to help people and make a difference that convinced them. We had to build a lot of trust with them. We were very careful to go through their mental health care professionals, whether it was a psychiatrist or a therapist. We talked to the parents. The first thing I would do when we would get on set as the interviewer, I would sit and I would just tell them about the things that I've gone through. And next thing you know, they're talking about the things they went through. And we told them, if you're uncomfortable, you just say, I'm uncomfortable, or I don't want to talk about that. So we really tried to put them first. And it's not about sensationalizing and getting the big story or the big moment. It's about the subtleties of how they feel. And that's what we sought to capture. And I think that's what makes it so relatable to people who will watch it.
And you spoke of McLean, just 11 years old. We have a clip of him talking about when he first started thinking of suicide. Take a look.
I asked my parents what would happen if I wasn't here, and I think that got them pretty worried.
Tara Gill, so when you see some of these testimonials, do you see some of the familiar warning signs? And what are those warning signs, not only for suicide ideation, but depression and anxiety that parents should look out for?
Mm-hmm. Right, so typically there are some signs that your child's behavior has gone, or mood has gone to a point where they need additional intervention. For depression, it's not just sadness, it's looking more like a depression that needs intervention. If they have a loss in appetite, change in sleeping patterns, they no longer enjoy the things that they used to enjoy, they are having slippage in grades and things like that. When they start to talk about death and dying, when they have poor hygiene, then you start to worry about, is this a collective of things that I need to explore further? And don't be afraid to bring that up to all the places that you would expect your pediatrician, educators, just to start asking questions about, how do I talk to my child about what's wrong, what's happening, is there something that's happened to them, and then how do I get treatment?
And Eric Ewers, what did these young people tell you about their feeling on whether there was enough access to treatment out there, or good treatment that could really help them with their struggles?
Well, it's a great question, because we were somewhat surprised to discover that literally every single one of them had really bad experiences at the onset in trying to find someone, partly because it took them months and months, and sometimes more than a year, to just find someone who could take them. And then when they did, Gabe, in his story, his parents talk about how the therapist would spin him around in his chair and tickle him with a feather, and these things were helping, supposedly. It wasn't doing anything to help poor Gabe. But the wonderful thing is that they all just slowly and steadily persevered and found their way, found their person, and so it was a journey for all of them, and it was a difficult one.
Tara Gill, what does that tell us about whether there is sufficient access to mental health care for all kids in this country, and then specifically in more marginalized communities of color, LGBTQ communities? How many barriers are still left?
Right. So unfortunately, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in the area of mental health and healthcare. Access is not what it needs to be. There simply are not enough providers to provide all the care. And then you find that since the pandemic, the rates of mental illness has increased among youth and adolescents. So what already was a field where there were not sufficient access, long waiting lists, a lot of demand, those demands have gotten worse, particularly in communities where there are already limitations in clinics. Those are the same families that tend to have lesser insurance or no insurance. So that makes the access more difficult. I think in those cases, we really have to think non-traditionally about how we can empower those and equip people who are not necessarily trained professionals, but caring adults. So how do you seek access from your religious provider, from someone at your school, either a school counselor, social worker, psychologist, or even an educator? You can do things like promote programs like Youth Mental Health First Aid that helps to identify symptoms in kids and how to talk to them to get them access to the right care. You have hotlines like NAMI that allow for youth to identify when they need more help and support through those trusted sources that are more like a hotline. Well, so really thinking about not just the traditional means, but non-traditional means at a time when there's not enough help. And historically, there have been reasons why people of particular communities, whether it's low economic status or cultural backgrounds, have not sought out mental health treatment. So we really have to kind of own that history and then do things to take corrective action to improve the quality of healthcare and mental health care for various populations, including African Americans.
Still a stigma out there, but this film I know goes a long way to go right toward those stigmas and really put this out in the open. We'll have to leave it there for now. A reminder to our viewers, the two-part film, Hiding in Plain Sight, premieres tonight at 9 on WTTW. And now our thanks to Tara Gill and Eric Ewers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
And still to come on Chicago Tonight, plans for big changes to McDonald's franchise system. That and more business headlines from Cranes. Will a slip of the tongue help or hurt in the heated battle between two incumbent Republicans vying for the same downstate congressional seat? And masks and identities are the centerpiece of an art show curated by Chicago rapper Vic Menza. But first, some more of today's top stories. None of Chicago's 49 outdoor public swimming pools will open in time for the 4th of July weekend because of shortage of lifeguards. The pools were supposed to open on Friday. Chicago Park District officials blamed the delay on a, quote, national shortage of lifeguards and, quote, several other factors. More than half of all summer lifeguard positions were vacant as of June 23rd, according to data obtained by WTTW News through a Freedom of Information request. An Amtrak train traveling from Los Angeles to Chicago derailed this afternoon in Missouri, killing at least 3 people. In a statement, Amtrak says the train struck a dump truck at a public crossing in Mendon, that's about 100 miles northeast of Kansas City, at around 1:42 Central Time. The company says there were approximately 243 passengers on board the train plus 12 crew, and that there were, quote, early reports of injuries. The Missouri State Highway Patrol says that 3 people have been confirmed dead and more than 50 others injured. The National Transportation Safety Board is investigating the incident. The Chicago Blackhawks have a new head coach. The team announced this morning that Luke Richardson will become the 40th head coach in franchise history. An NHL defenseman for 21 years, Richardson has spent the past 4 seasons as an assistant for the Montreal Canadiens, who last year reached the Stanley Cup Finals. Richardson replaces Derek King, who ended the season as the Blackhawks' interim coach after Jeremy Colleton was fired in November. And just a reminder, tomorrow is Election Day. Polling places for the Illinois primary in Chicago will be open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., and all those still in line at 7 will be permitted to vote. If you have not yet registered to vote, you can do so and vote on Election Day at your polling place, but you will need 2 forms of ID, one of which must list your current address. And before you go to the polls, don't forget to check out our 2022 voter guide, where you can search for candidates by name, race, and district to hear about why they want your vote. It's all at WTTW.com/voter guide. McDonald's is cooking up big changes for its franchise system. Yelp says it's going with a fully remote workforce, and a city-backed panel wants to breathe new life into the LaSalle Street corridor. Here to go behind the headlines is Crane Chicago business reporter Danny Ecker. Danny, good to see you as always. So let's start with McDonald's. They're making big changes to their franchise system. What are those changes and why?
Well, the company's now going to have a formal review of all of its franchisees every 20 years to determine if they should be allowed to keep their locations. And what's noteworthy about that is it comes in the wake of McDonald's saying they're going to make a big push to diversify the ranks of their franchisees. So this will provide an opportunity to review things like performance history and customer complaints about locations to determine whether longtime franchisees, like those that are passed from one generation to another, for example, should still be able to operate. And McDonald's has 14,000 locations in the United States, and 95% of those are franchised. So this has potential to create some waves.
So the corporate's going to exert some more control over those franchisees, it appears. Let's move on to the next story. Yelp, the internet giant, announces it is closing its Chicago offices. Although it's closing offices all over the country, it's going to go fully remote. They are right now in the merchandise mart. So how big a loss is that going to be?
Well, it certainly is, by perception at least, it's a big loss. You know, it's one of the more extreme examples, certainly, of the impact that COVID has had on the office market. I mean, Yelp already was trying to sublease a portion of its office at the Mart last year, and now they're basically saying, you know, this whole hybrid work thing isn't working for them, and they're better off going fully remote. We're not seeing a ton of examples like that, but we are seeing generally companies that are, you know, cutting back on office space and embracing remote work. But cases like this one certainly get the attention of other companies who are looking and saying, hey, how are we going to use offices or the lack of an office as a recruitment tool?
Could be a foreboding sign for some of that really valuable retail and office space downtown. And speaking of that, LaSalle Street is in a bit of a slump in terms of its vibrancy. A city-backed panel has been charged with reviving it. Tell us about some of those ideas.
Yeah, well, so the city is trying to figure out what it can do to revive LaSalle Street. You have a bunch of older office buildings that are highly vacant or will be soon, and that's not good when you're trying to, you know, restore vibrancy to the loop. So this panel from the Urban Land Institute put together a recommendation, and it's centered around generating more foot traffic on LaSalle. So the ideas they suggested included, you know, turning the 2 blocks north of the Board of Trade building into a public plaza with dining options and more lighting features, and maybe painting the streets and adding murals to alleyways. The idea is to make it a place where people will want to go, even if they don't work on LaSalle Street. And, you know, of course, the challenge is making this happen requires a lot of money. This panel recommended TIF funding and other incentives to be in play. So we'll see whether any of these ideas generate momentum or something like them in the years to come.
One of those renderings looked like it had a glass dome over LaSalle Street, kind of giving it that, like, Fremont Street feel from Las Vegas. A lot of ideas out there. All right, Danny Ecker, thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, Paris.
And up next, our Spotlight Politics team talks about primary election day, so please stay with us.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/Daily Briefing and sign up.
With just hours to go before the polls open, we are here to break down some of the marquee races in tomorrow's Illinois primary on this special election edition of Spotlight Politics. Here with all the last-minute political news are Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. Welcome back, everybody. So let's start with the Republican battle in the governor's race. Heather, what is shaping up to be the biggest issue in that race?
Well, the biggest issue is what it was from the very beginning. Was there a way for Richard Irvin to win the GOP nomination without full-throatedly embracing former President Donald Trump? And the apparent answer seems to be no. He is trailing Darren Bailey in the polls, who got a huge boost from the former president this weekend, giving him his full and total endorsement at that rally for Representative Mary Miller in Quincy. And the question is, it would take a huge come from behind victory for the former first frontrunner for Irvin to take the nomination. I think that he could even finish third behind Jesse Sullivan, whose campaign is making a case that he's surging in these last few days.
And Amanda, how is the Supreme Court's Roe decision going to be playing into this race?
I think it plays into it some, and certainly there are those who had been sort of suspicious of Ervin's credentials as a true conservative this whole time, and he had been wary to really weigh in even after that draft opinion had been leaked, saying, let's wait for it to come. And then his statement, now that there is a true decision, really focusing on parental notification versus on the overall issue of abortion, perhaps a nod to the realities, again, of both just the public sentiment in Illinois and the voters. As Heather noted, he'd been really running this race in a careful way to try to get through the primary in order to have an ability to win through the general election. That is something that according to polls, two front runners right now, they're staying hyper to the right, hyper conservative, pulling up those bona fides as much as possible, which is something that Pritzker has been helping, boosting their campaigns and presumably relishes, given that Trump was not at all successful here in Illinois. Pritzker thinks that's going to help him in the general.
And Paris, going back to Richard Irvin, he was funded by billionaire Ken Griffin, but now GOP money is going to Jesse Sullivan. Tell us what's going on there.
Well, I did a little search of recent donations on the Illinois campaign website, and I saw a lot of addresses from Wilmette and Winnetka and Glen Ellen and Wheaton and places like that. Certainly Sullivan's trying to position himself as perhaps a better alternative if you were the more establishment wing of the party. He's saying he's got a big bump going right now. That remains to be seen. I think some polls do have him in second. But it is very curious that Ken Griffin announced last week he's leaving town before this primary has actually happened. I can't read anything else into that other than he knows that it's pretty much a foregone conclusion. His candidate and a lot of his slate are probably not going to win in this primary. He thought that this would be the best chance to take on Governor Pritzker. And as Amanda said, Governor Pritzker spent a lot of money making sure that Darren Bailey was going to be his candidate. He got everything he wished for, including that Trump endorsement over the weekend. So now in the general election, Bailey is going to be tied with Donald Trump. And it's not as if the endorsement put him over the finish line. He was already way up in most of the polls.
So let's talk about the Secretary of State race. Heather, what are the issues in that race and what's separating the candidates?
Well, this is the race to replace Secretary of State Jesse White, who is retiring after a long and illustrious career. Ana Valencia, the city clerk of Chicago, is running against Alexi Janulius and Alderman David Moore. This has really been a race that has been all over the place with allegations of ethical violations and not a whole lot of focus on what these candidates would do if they were elected Secretary of State. We heard a little about that from David Moore, who said that he wants to do digital license plates and really bring the office into the 21st century. But there's been so much attention on the sort of the personality, that what the Secretary of State does and runs a huge bureaucracy, and we all have to interact with it when we get our driver's licenses and state IDs. That was really lost. Perhaps we'll be able to cover that a little bit more during the general election, because this is the best shot that Republicans have to pick up an office outside of the governor's race.
So former President Donald Trump, he was stumping for candidates downstate, including Representative Mary Miller, who's in a heated battle with Representative Rodney Davis for the seat in a newly drawn 15th congressional district. Here's what she said yesterday.
President Trump, on behalf of all the MAGA patriots in America, I want to thank you for the historic victory for life in the Supreme Court yesterday.
Amanda, slip of the tongue there?
That's what her campaign spokesperson has told media outlets, saying that she read it right there. Clearly, it was a slip of tongue. We are all on the air. Things happen, such as that. Even when you have a written word, it seems implausible. That said, it certainly is not a phrase that is appropriate for a congressperson to say, let alone to think. And there are a lot of people who say, yes, this is not a gaffe, maybe a Freudian slip, but that was what she said and needs to be apologizing vociferously for it if it was any sort of slip, and not what she's doing, which is blaming, quote unquote, the fake news media for making this into something. You can hear right there the words that she said.
Paris, could this hurt her in the race against Rodney Davis?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, whether it was a slip or not, the crowd applauded that line. So I don't know if it... Rodney Davis certainly has tried to make it an issue. He pounced on it, pounced on those comments. But, you know, given it's a largely rural district, it's a conservative district, it may not cause her harm in that district. But I agree with Amanda. She made that comment about Hitler was right about one thing back a year or so ago. And it's, I think you got to be real skeptical when buying the line that it was simply a slip-up or a misstatement. I mean, the full word came out and the full sentence happened. So if it is just a slip-up, perhaps the campaign could do better to sort of clarify and apologize for that.
So let's talk about the 6th congressional race. Amanda, Congressman Caston suspended his race after the death of his teenage daughter unexpectedly, but the campaign ads are back. Tell us about that race briefly.
Yeah, so didn't suspend running or anything, just both sides really took a pause on the ads. And we haven't seen the attacks come back like they had been, because this is the only race where you have an incumbent pitted against an incumbent. And that's in part due to Illinois losing a congressional seat and just this redrawn map that pitted the two together. So this is one where you have Newman really focusing on the issue lately, especially of abortion and sharing her personal story of having had one. Caston, however, says that he also is going to fight for the right for choice. And he is more, however, focused on generally energy, environmental issues. There is something I want to point out in this race. Newman has been dogged by some ethical issues and is under an investigation from a health ethics panel for having hired somebody, the deal being that she promised a job to this individual if he did not run against her back in 2020. They are both, by the way, freshmen.
Okay, so in the 7th congressional district, Heather, incumbent Representative Danny Davis, fierce opponent from Keena Collins. What are the issues here, and is this, the old guard versus the next generation?
It really is. Keena Collins is running a very progressive challenge against Danny Davis, who has been a congressman for a long time in Chicago and has, of course, a strong record on civil rights issues. However, we saw President Joe Biden endorse Danny Davis in his race, which I think raised a lot of eyebrows and made people think maybe this race is closer than people think. Keena Collins has really embraced the Justice Democrats, the squad in Congress, and has vowed to sort of take a much more progressive approach to her in Congress. And even though she might not vote that much different if elected in place of Danny Davis, their approaches and generations are very different.
Okay, Paris, in the newly drawn 3rd congressional district, 2 leading candidates are buying TV ads left and right. Tell us about the race between State Representative Delia Ramirez versus Alderman Gil Villegas.
Well, this is a newly drawn district. It would be the 2nd majority Latino district in Illinois. So it's something that the Democratic Party has their sights on. And this kind of comes down to the fault lines in the party. You've got Delia Ramirez, who's been endorsed by the more progressive groups, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, folks associated with AOC, whereas she's tabbed Villegas as kind of a former lobbyist and being more moderate, although Villegas will say he was the one that supported universal basic income, a pilot program in Chicago, before Mayor Lightfoot was even talking about it. Villegas also has some labor endorsements. So again, I mean, it's the more progressive wing of the party versus perhaps the more left of center wing there.
So the race to replace retiring Congressman Bobby Rush flooded with candidates there. Amanda, a few candidates' names that'll be familiar to folks. Will that be the difference, name recognition?
I think name recognition, but also just organization and who can help to get out the vote, who has been doing the most door knocking whether commercials are going to have any effect. I mean, there are so many people in this race. I think and voter turnout has been fairly low and is expected to continue to be so, that it is really hard to pinpoint who is going to be able to claim this nomination. One that, by the way, Rush has held this seat for 15 terms. So once you have that seat, the expectation is that you will well be able to hold on to it. And it really does have a legacy in Black politics and power. And so that's where you do see such a competitive field.
Of course, there are races in the county and Cook County as well, and a bunch of judges on the ballot. We'll have to talk about what happens during Wednesday's Spotlight. We'll have to leave it there for now. Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schatz. Thanks, everybody. And don't forget to check out our 2022 voter guide, where you can search for candidates by name, race, and district to hear why they want your vote. It's all at WTTW.com/voter guide. Up next, a new art show curated by Chicago rapper Vic Mensa. Stay with us.
We've made it.
Justice Jackson's appointment to the Supreme Court provides a beacon of hope.
Black women are underrepresented. We still rise. We still show up for one another.
It's us investing in the next generation and giving them something to enrich the next generation with.
One of Chicago's leading art galleries has joined forces with one of the city's top rappers. Victor Kwesi Mensah is better known as Vic Mensa. He's the founder of the hip-hop collective Save Money, which includes Chance the Rapper and Joey Perp. Vic Mensa curated a gallery show in the West Loop, and that is where producer Mark Vitale met him.
The day before the show opened at the Kavi Gupta Gallery, Vic Mensa told us about his creative journey.
Music is what's taking me around the world, and it's my passion, but I'm also not limited to any one form of expression.
His latest expression is a show called Skin and Masks. It was inspired by Frantz Fanon, the influential 20th century thinker and author of Black Skin, White Masks.
It's like his seminal text, and he's dissecting the psychological ramifications of colonialism and white supremacy and imperialism and all of those things. And I felt that concept could relate well to an art show.
Mensa invited old friends like Hebrew Brantley to contribute work. While we were there, another artist dropped in.
Thelonious Stokes, Chicago's own. This is Thelonious's work right here.
It's a portrait of a young Emmett Till and his father, Louis Till, sourced from old photographs. Other works chosen by Mensa reflect his interest in getting more representation on gallery walls.
A lot of his ideology aligns with the gallery's ideology of really making things more accessible and reaching back into the community and making sure that everyone's voices are heard and that everyone's individual visions are amplified.
Mensa's voice was first amplified when he was a teenager, performing with the band Kids These Days. More recently, the Hyde Park native collaborated with Chance the Rapper. And he started a foundation, Save Money, Save Life, or SMSL, that aims to help people from Chicago and the Republic of Ghana in West Africa.
We founded that organization in 2018, basically as a vessel to respond creatively to the problems faced by the people. The gallery has been so gracious to donate their percentage from the show to SMSL for the formation of an art program in Ghana. And so I've been doing a lot of things in Ghana. My father's Ghanaian, entire half of my family lives there. My uncle in Ghana is a legendary high life musician, Chief Kofi Sami. His group is called the Okukuseku International Band. So I got music in my blood, art in my blood in that way. Quote by James Baldwin moves me, and that is know from whence you came. That way there are absolutely no limitations to where you can go. And I believe that that's the ethos of what we're creating in Ghana right now.
We work with a lot of curators, a lot of people that are, kind of occupy the art space, the art world, the art ecosystem. So it's been really refreshing to work with someone that kind of exists outside of that narrative.
I think I want people to take a way that the youth has something to say, you know? That we have ideas about imagination, about the future. We have perspectives influenced by but not limited to the past. That in this moment of, you know, sometimes it feels like a culmination of society's ills and America's melting pot of wrongdoing coming to a boil. That it's art and it's poetry and it's film that will be carrying the bastion of revolution and will be the ones imagining and dreaming of solutions.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
Vic Menza's show is called Skin and Masks, and it just opened at Kavi Gupta Gallery. They have several spaces in town, and this exhibition is in their West Loop location. You can find out more on our website. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7.
And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a proud sponsor of diversity, equity, and inclusion-focused free continuing legal education for lawyers throughout the region.
Good grief, Nelly.
Antiques Roadshow, next on WTTW.